Hi, folks. My name's Jarrett Myers. I'm a member of the Toronto Region Board of Directors and wanted to welcome everyone to this meeting focused on Black Lives Matter implications for public administration. And we've got a fantastic panel. We have Jane Gobia, who is the Vice President of Inclusive Communities at Sheridan College. Sonia Era Brown, who's the Assistant Deputy Minister of the OPS Anti-Racism Directorate, and Lisa Gonzalez, who's the General Manager at the Regional Municipality of York. And each of these speakers has had a very long and distinguished career focused on building more inclusive societies and inclusive communities, and indeed inclusive organizations. So we're really excited today to have this important dialogue, share perspectives, learn from one another. And I'm really pleased to report that we've got more than 750 people registered for this meeting, which is a bit of a record for IPAC Toronto and really speaks to the importance of the topic. And want to thank everyone for taking the time out of their day to contribute to this discussion. I think with that video kind of that we started off with kind of captured some of the perspectives, and we expect a really great discussion. And I think, just from my own perspective, I just would share that it's pretty difficult not to be moved by what's going on in our communities and indeed around the world. And do want to again say thank you to everyone for taking part, and particularly our speakers for sharing their perspectives. So the format is to have Nosa is going to kick us off. She's going to spend about 10 minutes giving us her perspectives on a number of the topics, and then that's going to be followed by Jane. So she'll have another 10 minutes, and then Lisa will round out the panel part of the discussion for another 10 minutes or so. And folks who are taking part in the meeting, feel free to ask any questions in the Q&A side. And then there's also a chat function here. So if you want to make any comments, you can also use that. After the speakers have provided some opening remarks, then we'll open it up. I'll help to facilitate the discussion, and we look forward to getting perspectives on the topic. And we have set out a little bit of an intro within the meeting invite, and we expect to get into some discussion around the diversity of government and public services, some of the challenges for building a more inclusive public service, also to look at what the opportunities are and where there's scope for innovation and experimentation. And a big theme, I think, for today's discussion is how we translate some of the protest movement and the issues that have been raised into meaningful action, and that translates into the lasting change that we all want to see. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Nosa, who's going to kick us off with the panel part of the discussion today.
All right, great. Thank you so much. Hello, everyone. My name is Sonia Era Brown, and I joined the Ontario's Anti-Racism Directorate as the Assistant Deputy Minister this past July. I'm really pleased to be part of this panel today and to be joined by my fellow panelists, Jane and Lisa. A huge thank you to Jared and the entire IPAC team for bringing us together, and to every one of you for joining this conversation this morning. The video that we just watched does set an important context and backdrop. And for diversity, equity, inclusion practitioners and public administrators generally, the influx of interest we're seeing from organizations that want to support their employees and workforce around systemic racism is frankly just unprecedented. And of course, all of this is happening in the middle of the coronavirus pandemic, which is also having a huge impact on Black racialized people in areas ranging from health to employment. The Anti-Racism Directorate, or ARD, as I will refer to it, leads the provincial government's anti-racism work. We're working to actively undo the impacts of systemic racism in our policies, services, programs, and our practices. So our priority areas of focus are especially on anti-Black racism, on anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia. So what I'm going to do is talk about the themes that Jared had laid out, starting with the diversity that we see in government, with a special focus on the Ontario Public Service, the provincial government. So how diverse is government and public services today? There are two dimensions to this question that I'll try to cover. So first is the diversity of the OPS as a workplace, so in terms of people. Most of you know the Ontario Public Service employs over 60,000 people across 4 geographic regions, pretty large employer. We are still working to reflect population demographics, especially in senior leadership positions. Based on our data from our most recent employee experience survey, which we conducted last year, 23% of respondents have self-identified as belonging to a racialized group, with fewer than 20% representation in senior management positions. And from the same survey, just over 5% of respondents identified as Black, and 4.2% of managers and senior executives also identified as Black. So based on those stats, we obviously still have work to do as we move towards achieving parity with the labor force. Beyond our composition and what we look like, I also wanted to touch on a couple of things we are doing to ensure equity and diversity in, for our work policies and our programs and services. In terms of the diversity of those policies, we're building our capacity as an organization to be anti-racist and to recognize systemic racism and anti-Black racism in a number of key ways. So first of all, and I'm sure this will be echoed by my fellow panelists, education, training, capacity building is key. We are working to ensure that we provide mandatory training for all staff, starting with our leadership cadre this fall. We know that providing this capacity building mechanism and tools will just simply be a way to set the foundation. We also have to get concrete with that training. In addition to that, we are working towards parity for the most underrepresented groups in senior leadership within the OPS, and we've set an ambitious target to achieve that parity by 2025. And beyond leadership diversification, through our anti-racism policy, and if you haven't had a chance to look at it yet, it's on ontario.ca. We have a policy that aims to break down the barriers to employee and advancement. So we work with ministries to increase the representation of Indigenous, Black, and racialized employees through very specific pathways to leadership. Last week, some of you may have seen that we launched a comprehensive third-party review of inclusive workplace policies and programs with a special focus on anti-Black racism and anti-Indigenous racism. And this was informed by recommendations from our internal networks, especially our Black OPSers. We'll call them the BOPSers. So we're doing all of that. And on the outside, we have, the anti-racism and anti-hate grant program that we're working on. I believe we've just committed $1.6 million to support community anti-racism initiatives, focusing on anti-Black racism and anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Semitism, and Islamophobia. And the last thing I will touch on in terms of how we are working towards advancing equity is a commitment to data standards and collecting race-based data. So last year, we set out new data standards on how public sector organizations, especially in child welfare in education and justice areas must begin collecting and reporting race-based information to ensure that we are tracking and we're impactful and we start to see and measure the outcomes that we're looking for. And those are sort of the stronger and broader outcomes that are more meaningful. I can tell you by the end of the year how many leaders have taken training, which is a good indicator. But really what matters is seeing that change start to happen in those specific sectors, seeing that leadership diversification, and being able to move the yardstick on those numbers that I just presented. So moving on from then, I think one of the other questions that Jared wanted us to sort of touch on were the challenges associated with building a more inclusive public service and the scope for innovation and experimentation. So because we're a public service and, you know, that we have a mandate to sort of serve Ontarians, there are always challenges with doing that. And, you know, one of the challenge that's not unique to this space is the challenge of common ground and trying to get an understanding of the problem we're trying to solve and understanding the language and the objective, what we want to achieve and why, right? The public service is not immune to a diversity of opinion on this. And we were at very different places this summer. It was really interesting to see how we all sort of, where we each start in terms of the conversation. You know, sometimes people go back to, you know, tell me about this. What is systemic racism and is there systemic racism? And it can be very frustrating because there are others who just want to move beyond that. The case has been made, there are numerous reports, we need to take action. So really finding that common ground is a challenge, and making sure that the leadership understands that common ground. And the next sort of challenge that I would mention is to go beyond the diversity and inclusion policies that we've had that laid a good foundation. But what we often find is that instead of driving fundamental changes in organization, we tend to graft on onto existing policies. So new guidelines, new practices, new programs, new structures onto the existing framework, when fundamentally that framework itself needs to shift. We need to shift how we hire, we need to shift how we think about our management and progression. And sometimes these attempts paint everyone with the same generalized sort of policy brush when we need targeted solutions that are focused on equity. And that in itself can be a challenge because as a lot of you on the call are, you know, public administrators, we're trained very well to do our policy development and research and develop your policy. But in some ways, and the pandemic has really revealed that, we need to be very creative in looking beyond the policy and in looking beyond our traditional ways of solving problems and include the voices that we traditionally do not. The third challenge I'd like to touch on is the impact of the urgent transformational change and the fact that they sometimes are not immediate. So committing to a longer term transformation in an atmosphere where we have to have quick wins and low hanging fruit and all of that, you know, name your cliche. It's a very difficult challenge to grapple with because you do have to show progress, but sometimes it does take time to see those meaningful outcomes and demonstrating the action towards those outcomes because of the complexity and the interrelatedness of the issues. So like I mentioned, while I can tell you in terms of outputs, who's getting trained, who's coming in, you know, those longer term outcomes that we actually want. You know, I'm a mother of, you know, Black children, good educational outcomes for our children. You know, when we recruit, being able to see ourselves reflected in leadership. Those are the outcomes that we want to see. And sometimes it's not as easy as just, you know, flipping a switch. So having said all of that out, I'll just touch on a little bit on the opportunities for innovation that I see given these challenges and what excites me about the scope for innovation. In terms of leadership diversification, the OPS anti-racism policy recognizes that a pan-diversity approach isn't enough to address racial disparities and is focused on identifying, removing, preventing those barriers to career advancement for Black, Indigenous, and racialized employees. So we have experts and the expertise to really get at the heart of the issues in recruitment and retention. We are also looking to increase our capacity to collect race-based data and socio-demographic workforce data, so that we have the information we need to fully take stock of the situation from each point in the employment life cycle. We're not there yet, but we have started to collect race-based data for the first time through our employee engagement surveys last year. This is voluntary, but it's a good step in helping understand the scope and impact. Another area for innovation is, like I mentioned off the top, true collaboration with private sector. In the video you just saw, you could see the raw emotion, and everyone is talking about how this time it sounds different, and the push for change, it feels different, and they're pushing well beyond government, well past government. How do we as government and the public service collaborate with the private sector, with partners, with grassroots movements, with all of us coming to the table? Government alone cannot deliver effective solutions to systemic racism. We will pursue those partnerships and those civic engagements, and beyond the people that we traditionally engage as well, to be able to start to figure out what those solutions would be. And that's a huge area of opportunity for us, and one that the Directorate is driving this fall. Another area of opportunity, if not necessarily for innovation, is really to do our anti-racism capacity building differently. So, for example, instead of just training and educating our leaders about microaggressions or anti-racism, we're linking it to concrete actions that they have to take with accountabilities. Who are you accountable to if your executive team does not reflect what Ontario or even the people that we serve look like? Who's accountable for that? How would they be held accountable? What are those things, mechanisms that we can put in place? So those are the things that we're looking at. So to conclude, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, given the urgency and attention on racism, especially anti-Black racism at the moment, it's very tempting to assume that the recognition of inequity, the town halls, the memos, the tweets, the conversation around this is enough to bring change. But meaningful and long-lasting change, and the change we're really driving to see to create an anti-racist workplace, requires a very strategic vision, very strategic intent, and sustained action. We need to continue to be able to sustain this momentum. That lasting change is really what we're trying to push at the Directorate, and we have a long way to go, but we are making some progress. Speaking about progress, I invite you to check out our progress report that we just released yesterday on the steps that we're taking through the Anti-Racism Directorate, and really a whole of government approach to make sure that we meet the objectives of the moment. Thank you for allowing me to share our perspectives, and I'll hand it over to Jared.
That's great, fantastic. Thank you, Nosa. We're getting a lot of really great questions and comments coming in, so keep those coming. But we are going to move on to have Lisa provide another set of opening remarks, and we'll come back to the questions and comments. But please continue to feed those in.
Thank you, Jared, and well said, Nosa. So thank you for welcoming me here today. So I'm Lisa Gonzalez. I'm the General Manager for Paramedic and Senior Services with the Regional Municipality of York. So as we looked at that video, so it was back in 2013 with the acquittal of Trayvon Martin's killer, inspired by Alicia Garza, an American civil rights activist, to declare that Black Lives Matter. He formed the movement dedicating to finishing the work begun by its predecessors. As a mother of 3 Black sons, I, like many of you, have been shaken by the current events and injustices happening in to the Black community. And I'd first like to acknowledge those of you who have been personally impacted by these tragic events. I am truly sorry, and I acknowledge your pain. For many not directly impacted by events like this, sometimes the default response is silence. There has, however, been a lot of conversation and discussion about systemic racism and the role it has played. I have also seen many compare systemic racism to being very much like a virus that is spread easily and is very damaging. The Toronto Board of Health recently passed a resolution declaring anti-Black racism as a public health crisis. Our response as a society needs to be more vigilant, and I am very encouraged by the opportunity like we have today to address racism as something that is virulent as opposed to something that is tolerable. I also want to thank the organizers of IPAC for not giving up on this discussion. I've been asked to participate on a panel on 2 previous occasions to discuss the topic of diversity and inclusion over the last couple of years. And on both occasions, the sessions were canceled because there wasn't enough interest, registrations were low. And I asked myself, why was this? Was it because it wasn't enough? It wasn't important enough, not a priority? Or was it because this is an uncomfortable topic, especially when we call out behaviors that are exclusionary, or we present data that shows how our workforces don't reflect the very communities we are supposed to be serving. 6 years ago, people weren't even using the phrase systemic racism beyond activist and academic circles. And now we are in a place where everyone is talking about it, reading about it, researching on it, listening to, participating in it. There's so many conversations about it. So in my remarks this morning, I want to focus on what I see as the key implications from a municipal perspective. And I hope to highlight for you how I see the role of municipal governments in addressing systemic racism. So in response to the Black Lives Movement, many municipal governments are making commitments to develop action plans and strategies, which is great. They've actually been on the ground, many participating and supporting the various protests. And I think by the very nature of municipal services, we are connected to the local community and we see the impacts firsthand. We have to react and respond. Within a week of George Floyd's tragic death, you may have noticed that many municipal governments across all jurisdictions were actively engaged with their local communities with unprecedented scope and speed. So what are we doing? So at my organization, we scanned about just over 50 organizations, including municipal governments, to see what immediate action was being taken in response to the movement. Some common actions included a commitment to mandatory anti-Black racism education for elected officials and senior leadership, the establishment of anti-Black racism task forces and action plans, the official denouncement of anti-Black racism and all forms of discrimination, the commitment to conduct equity audits of employment practices, and active and renewed engagement with Black community groups, which are all wonderful things that are happening. And I think NOSA also mentioned the provincial government is taking similar actions. In my organization at York Region, we responded by holding anti-Black racism dialogues for all of our Black staff to understand their lived experience in the workplace, and to recommend actions for change. These dialogues reveal that no one organization is immune to systemic racism, not mine, not yours, or not any. The movement has pushed municipal governments to act, and many are, not because they could, but also because they had to. The community, both inside and outside the organization, has demanded it, and humanity has demanded it. We all have a role in seizing this important moment in human history to right what is wrong at all levels of government. And it's not just only responding in the moment to issues and opportunities, but being proactive in building those networks, those collaborations to be ready in a moment to work together with a common commitment to those they serve. How many of you are aware of or regularly engage with associations representing the Black, Indigenous, and people of color communities? In York Region, for example, we've led the Inclusion Charter for York Region initiative, which has brought together all of our local municipalities, the hospitals and school boards, police services, conservation authorities, and agencies, all with a common commitment to create and enhance and broaden our welcoming and inclusive communities. To date, 32 organizations have signed on to the charter, and we are continually working together on collective actions. And in response to George Floyd's tragic death, this collaboration quickly came together to share resources and to support each other to best respond to respond to needs both in our workplaces and in our communities. And this work continues. I believe that it's community collaborations like this and the role that our Inclusion Charter has played in addressing racism that will make a difference. Municipal governments play a critical role in making this work. Broadly speaking, and because of our very nature, municipal governments should and can be the driver and the supplier of resources that bring diverse groups together. They can also be the source of taking the work of these partnerships out into the community for feedback and also reporting those outcomes back to the community. Municipalities work with all levels of government and the community, and we can offer that strategic lens to community efforts, identifying opportunities and making many important connections and linkages between programs and people. I'd like to say that we also are the glue that keeps groups together on track and achieving goals. We can also provide space for collective and continued learning. And it's times like now that we can bring diverse community partners together to quickly to respond. However, I do want to acknowledge that we are creatures of the systems that we are rooted in. Our organizations, like many, are flawed. And as we look outward to our communities, we must also look inward to the systems that drive us. Systemic racism is embedded in how we operate, and as public administrators and civil servants, we must do better. We need to take targeted and concerted actions to break these cycles and say it's not okay. But how do we do this if we don't acknowledge that the root cause of these inequities lies within the very structures themselves? We have many systems and people who believe that and operate based on the belief that racism ended with the end of slavery, or get defensive when there's even a mention that racism even exists. And I'm the first to admit, as a Black woman and as a civil servant, I could have and I should have done more. And even though I've had roles to promote inclusion and diversity, this work really has not gone far enough. I just want to quote a couple of things from a book that I'm sure many of you probably have heard of or read. It's called White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo. The first time I heard her speak, what she said made a whole lot of sense. She is a white woman, and she says that, and I quote, "Given how seldom white people experience racial discomfort in a society we dominate, we haven't had to build our racial stamina." She goes further to say, socialized into a deeply internalized sense of superiority that we either are unaware or can never admit to ourselves, we become highly fragile in the conversations about race. Thus, we perceive any attempt to connect us to the system of racism as unsettling and an unfair moral offense. I think that's very powerful and explains a lot. So what is the role of municipal governments in Black Lives Matter movement? We must recognize and fulfill the critical role we play as a responsive community driver, and recognize and address the inequities and racism that are built into the very structures we are a part of. But I'd like to say governments are more than structures, they are people. So one of the questions for today's conversation is aimed at better understanding diversity in the public service. And I think, as I agree with Nosa, it really depends on how we interpret this question. Now, do we want to see more Blacks, Indigenous, and people of color in leadership, in policy, or in frontline operations? I would argue that the lack of diversity at the leadership level is one of the biggest challenges of building a more inclusive and diverse public service. And if we don't unpack with a critical eye who our leaders and decision makers and influencers are, and take targeted actions to recruit and diversify this group, we limit any ability to really engage in or address systemic racism. And as the saying goes, you don't know what you don't know. Leadership demographics must diversify to address racism head on. A recent study showed that racialized people are the population majority in Toronto at 51.4%. However, only 15% of board positions are held by racialized persons in Toronto. And when we look at senior executives in the municipal, and when we also look at differences in level of representation within sectors such as municipal agencies, boards, and commissions, which have a higher level of representation of racialized people at 21.7% and provincial ones at 10.7%. And what about senior executives in municipal and regional government? I'd say the picture is a little bit more concerning. The data that we could find is from a 2009 study, so it is a bit dated. On average, at the time, only 4% of senior executives in the municipal sector identified as a visible minority. And when we identify challenges to building a more inclusive public service, this may be one of our greatest ones. These numbers need to change, and so do the outdated systems that support these numbers and the barriers for racialized people taking leadership positions. I also wanted to mention a few years ago, York Region, in partnership with York Regional Police, City of Toronto, Regions of Durham, Peel and Halton, sponsored the Black Experience Project, which is a research study led by Environics Institute for Survey Research. And the study really asked the question, what does it mean to be Black in the GTA? And it highlighted a number of factors that can lead to successes or act as challenges to Black individuals. The data, and I encourage each of you to read it, the data and final report, they were released back in 2017 and can be found on the blackexperienceproject.ca website. But it does address things like, and provides excellent insights into things like sense of belonging to one's community and levels of trust with government organizations. I was actually really happy to see that one of the authors of the study, Ms. Marva Wisdom, who is a well-known leader in the local Black community in the city of Guelph, was also appointed by the Guelph Police Services to help it in selection of its next round of senior officers. She's actually the first ever civilian to sit on a panel to consider the candidates in the next round of hiring. So again, on this, I think this is a really great local example of some progressive action taken by a police service. Without addressing systemic anti-Black racism in our policies and processes, in our employment practices, education systems, and representation at leadership tables, these numbers won't change. That's simply unacceptable. There is a lot of momentum, and I remain very optimistic that the scope for innovation and experimentation right now is so great. So I want to conclude with some tangible actions that we can take right now. So first, we must be prepared to listen, engage, and repair. As I mentioned before, in my organization, we held anti-Black racism dialogues this summer. We asked our staff 3 basic questions. What experiences have you had as a Black employee faced in this workplace? What should we be doing differently to respond to anti-Black racism in our global and local communities? And what actions should we take to ensure that there is no place for anti-Black racism in our workplace? These actions, I hope, will now move forward to begin to repair what is broken. Secondly, anti-racism education and learning must be embedded in our institutions. It must be made mandatory at all levels, right from elected officials, senior officials, all the way through our organizations. I also want to say, and don't always depend on people of color or marginalized groups to teach you. There's a plethora of books and literature on the topic. There's really no excuse not to learn, not to be curious, and not to be educated on anti-Black racism. And within our education system, I encourage the provincial government, I know many have advocated already, to decolonize the curriculum and to rebuild it to represent Canada's diverse population. And while I support diversity and inclusion and anti-racism training, it's not enough. As institutions, we must audit our policies, culture, and structures to determine whether those structures, by their very nature, help or hinder a diverse and inclusive workplace. We need to look at our policies and ask, what's the actual makeup of our workforce? What does the benefit plan look like? How are complaints handled? And do employees feel safe to comment or report on racism in the workplace? Who's getting the promotions? It's really about building structures that truly embed equity, diversity, and inclusion. Also, to facilitate more effective policymaking and service delivery, we need to build more authentic relationships with the Black community, the communities we serve, and those who are marginalized. There needs to be more, I heard this term used by a local councillor in the City of London, there needs to be more in-reach by government into communities, to be inside and connect to understand these communities and their systems and structures, rather than just more outreach, where we send out some messages expecting these communities to come to us. Also, community task forces that address anti-Black racism are another good place to start. We must also act on the facts and the data, not just talk about it. And I think Nosa said it very well. The fact that we're collecting race-based data is important. This needs to be part of our dashboards for decision-making and action plans to diversify our workforce. And when you add the COVID race-based data, it's helping to make this picture even clearer. I'd also suggest that we bring back employment equity and internships, programs that target specific underrepresented marginalized groups. I note that the Ontario Employment Equity Act was repealed back in 1995, but it still does exist federally. I think it was an important reason why I know that I got into provincial government at the time. Many organizations are also grappling with equality versus equity. And I think that, again, we must embed equity into everything we do. Having equitable practices, policies and practices needs to be something that it goes beyond equality. Equality, in my opinion, does not go far enough. Equity really means giving people what they need to reach their best. And in organizations that have diversity, equity, and inclusion teams, we really can't expect them to address systemic issues within the organization without giving them authority and to set the rules of the system and power to influence structures and culture. And finally, as public sector organizations, I really think the innovation is there now for us to establish more social procurement policies and practices. Some organizations, for example, have processes that support diverse suppliers. And again, this is an emerging practice that we could also use to promote the strength of Black-run businesses and Black business leaders. I think it's a really simple process to change those statistics that must be changed. So finally, in conclusion, our world has been shaken by the current events and injustices happening in the Black community. Organizations across all sectors, including the municipal sector, are taking action to address systemic racism in our policies and processes, in our workforce culture, and in our communities. This is extremely hard and painful work. We are confronting sides of ourselves, our organizations, and our communities that have been avoided or we're unaware of. And there was a quote from Dr. Martin Luther King that really resonates with me, and it reads, "In the end, we will remember not the words of our enemies, but the silence of our friends." There is no turning back. Even if our default mechanism is silence, none of us can be silent anymore. So thank you very much for listening, and I look forward to the rest of our conversation.
Thank you, Lisa. That was an excellent overview. Lots of great material in there, and a number of things I'd like to follow up on with you, which we will. And I do see lots of great questions and comments coming in, links to a number of the initiatives that have been referred to. So I do encourage folks to continue to provide those comments and ask those questions and follow those links. So I'm going to turn it over to Jane, who's going to give some opening remarks from her perspective, and then in a few minutes we'll dive into some Q&A with the panelists.
Thank you. My name is Jane Gobia, and I am the Vice President of Inclusive Communities here at Sheridan College. And I will begin at the beginning, not at the end, with my session today. And I will focus actually on the post-secondary sector. And why I want to start on the post-secondary sector is, first of all, my comfort zone. I have worked at both colleges and universities all my life. And it is the area that I'm more familiar with. And I want to go there and link straight with what Lisa just finished with, the quote from Martin Luther King about the silence of our friends. So I want to give the post-secondary sector, and my focus is actually going to be on what everyday person, all of us, individuals, irrespective of our positions, our position of powers can do. So knowing the post-secondary sector, this landscape, the pandemic in that we find ourselves in has exposed the long-standing inequities and the social mobility, economic resilience, and social injustices. So we know unproportionately racialized people of color have experienced much more negative impact as a result of the pandemic. Now, I want you to put that at the back of your mind because we are talking about social injustice in this moment, 2020, just 2020. And in fact, probably just the last few months that we are in right now. Now, what pandemic forced us to do was to hibernate and to actually stay apart and stay away from each other. In that process, what became clear is that we normalized how we connect and interact with each other, and virtual and online connections became much more a default way of engaging and interacting with one another. And I want to focus then what that means for the education sector. So when this racial injustice, the George Floyd came in, for a community that was hibernating, or society that was hibernating, for a society that the only source of communication was social media and online virtual communication, then people exploited that, and it was accessible, and it had become our normal in our communication. So from the academic point of view, the first thing that we saw was the hashtag Strike for Black Lives. And this is the community, the scientists in particular, asked for a day to meet and ask people to meet and engage or meet on with themselves and engage in questioning the social injustice that we see and what their role is. So they asked every member of the community to commit to taking action. And let me emphasize every member of the community, because until every member of our community commits to doing some action, it's not going to be enough to wait for people who have position of power to change the trajectory that we are facing today. So there's thousands of scientists worldwide went on strike for Black lives. Very unprecedented, actually, including scientists in Canada and across Canadian institutions. Then came the hashtag Black in the Ivory. And the hashtag Black in the Ivory was two Black faculty members who decided to share their experience. And as soon as they did that, there was a Twitter firestorm of many, many, many other Black faculty members sharing the experiences of what it is like to be a Black faculty member in the academy, in the Ivory Tower. And people shared heartbreaking stories of microaggression and outright discrimination in their workplaces or in the places that they have chosen in their careers of their lives. So Black in the Ivory also was another movement where everyday faculty shared their own experiences. I want to bring to your attention what just happened much closer home with the hashtag not Black in the dressing room. In the dressing room was sharing the perspective of what happened backstage or racism in the backstage for people in the performing arts industry. And not unfamiliar, we've had a lot in this field, but in the video Black Like Me, people in the Stratford Theatre started sharing, and all programs that teach media, television, performing arts took up. And for me and for us at Sheridan, we experienced a very own Twitter storm of our own from our community members expressing their dissatisfaction and the many times when they have experienced discrimination in the academy. Now, people sharing their own stories, everyday people sharing their own stories has a real impact on people, on change in the society. Not long ago, just this September, we had September 9 and 10. Again, the academy called for a 2-day strike. And the staff and students actually observed 2 days of sit-in to protest against violence against Black people and the anti-indigenous people. They are BIPOC and anti-indigenous experiences on campuses. So again, students, faculty, administrators sitting together to express and share their perspective. And I'm moving a little fast because I'm quite familiar, aware that time is not on our side. But then came in, apart from people calling for strikes and hashtag, came in open letters. And this is another tool that the universities have used quite ably in communicating what they are. I'm just sharing this one, and there are thousands of letters that were written. Open letters. Open letters means a letter written and published openly by a group or an individual to the audience for other people to read. And so University of Iowa, the reason I picked University of Iowa was because it was not one individual who wrote a letter or one organization. It was the diversity councils across the institution that wrote to the president asking for more than platitudes and statements, asking that, that the university engages in more action and pay attention to how many people signed the letter. So these were student groups, committees, professors, students, employee, alumni who signed this letter, joint letter to the university community leadership. We also have seen a huge growth in public petitions signed by thousands of people. And public petitions are in the public domain, again, highlighting a certain issue in a community. I want to give another open letter that was written, and you can find all this in public sphere, an open letter to University of Calgary that was on June 9th. It was addressed to the senior leadership, signed by over 1,000 current, past employees and students, and even members of the community. Over 1,000 people with their names and signature appended into the open letter. Again, what they were talking about is they want to see more actionable steps and metrics. And note, most of these letters, most of these demands are on what is actionable. They want to see metrics. Just very close here, the University of Toronto students wrote an open letter again on U of T to defund their campus police, and they had other demands that were on security. And this is an example of one area that focuses on security. And while most campuses have campus polices, they also have security. And this is one very common demand that we have seen from students. Now, I will not focus so much on institutional responses, but I want to say that for every institution, institutions have responded very differently to this call. And of course, the calls have been very different as well. The question you want to ask when you see an institutional response is this the institution being responsive? Is this the institution being reactive? Is this the institution being proactive? Or is this really principled leadership from the institution? And we work with very smart people. They can see, and they know the difference between being proactive, reactive, responsive, and really expressing some principled leadership moment. I wanted to say that the hashtags, the protests, the open letters, the forums, the strikes, to what end? For what purpose? What do they achieve? And really on their own, they are not an end in themselves. These shed spotlight on injustices. The purpose of all this is to shed light on injustices. The purpose of this is to heighten our public awareness or raise mass consciousness of an issue that is happening. The purpose is really to create discomfort. And I think we all need to feel a little bit of discomfort, because no one is comfortable in this environment when discrimination, when microaggression is happening to them. And the purpose of all these hashtags, protest, open letters is really to activate public discourse and spur policy and action. We want to see change in policies. We want to see action. That's what the people in our communities are asking for. Institutions have done, we've seen Western was one of those institutions that have responded by apologizing, public apology, appointing senior leadership to advise the president on diversity issues, and the responses from institutions are different. We saw from Ryerson Journalism School after open letters that were sent and signed petitions, have offered to offer journalism courses, new journalism courses. So institutions have responded differently. And actually the last response that we have seen is from an event that is happening very soon, where the University of Toronto and other Canadian universities are coming together to facilitate a national conversation with the goal of creating some action items or developing some concrete actions. What I want to say is we expect more than statements at this point. If you are a person in a position of power, people expect more than platitudes and statements. people expect more than education and workshops. Like, we've been doing that enough, and people are actually feeling disheartened when people in power do not do and use their power to change. Now, what is very encouraging is the power of the people. And what I wanted to present here today is the power of the people in institutions, the power of the people. And when I mean the power of the people, I mean the people who do not have position of powers to demand for change and to ask for more and to hold their institutions accountable. And so if you're here today without a position, what I want you to know is you have a voice. You can write a letter. You are a member of an organization or a member of a group. Join together, join with other groups, and communicate, exchange your perspectives, bring those needs to the people who can do the change, and actually tell the people the change. So the greatest justice that you can do is to use your power, and the greatest injustice that you can do is to feel powerless, because feeling powerless does not help you or the cause that we are in. I'll stop there.
That's excellent, Jane. And a lot of positive feedback and gratitude is piling in on the comments bar, and a recognition that we really can't do this topic justice in the time we have available. So I did want to, just in the last few minutes that folks have, turn it over to our panelists. And there's a number of different questions that have been asked. You're sort of welcome to provide any input on one or more of those questions. I think, two that have really come to the fore. One is just tactically, if there's anything specific that you would recommend people on this call do differently. And then a higher level question that has come up is just around the difference between a focus on pushing the Black Lives Matter agenda and movement forward versus the broader inclusive organizational agenda. And if you sort of see a trade-off there, how you would advise on managing that. So I know those are two pretty big questions, but maybe we'll just quickly give the panelists an opportunity, just a minute or so each, to weigh in on anything that you folks would like to do. And Nosa, maybe we'll just start with you.
Sure. Thanks so much, Jared. And again, thanks to everyone for all of the comments. And I've been trying to address as many as I could. If I could just talk about the action piece, because I think that'll be a good note to sort of wrap up, like what can we do? And Jane actually articulated this very well in terms of, it's not really about what title you have, that everyone has a sphere of influence and you can act from that sphere of influence. So I think one of the things we're doing differently in terms of everyone educating themselves about, the current state of affairs is really providing concrete tools, concrete things that we can do at wherever we are. So from my perspective as a public servant, so now that I know better, how can I do better? And I need that tool and support to be able to help. So I think this is something different that we are doing, is providing our frontline managers with the toolkits, the supports that they actually need to be able to be proactively anti-racist, not just dealing with symptoms after the fact, but proactively looking at who we're bringing in, who we're training, who we're championing, and how do you do that? How do you have those conversations? I think those concrete examples would be helpful. I'll hand it over to my panelists.
Great. Lisa, did you want to offer any kind of concluding remarks?
Yeah, and I guess, my overall feeling is the silence. And I think that's one of the areas where, and I think where people need to actually speak up and call out when they see things happening in the workforce, like in the workplace. There also needs to be that authenticism, like, those authentic relationships. I think this discussion has been going on for so long, and we see people signing pieces of paper, we see policy changes, but I think that there needs to be authentic change and willingness to change, and accepting, when we point out there's a flaw, accepting it and not necessarily being defensive about it. So a lot of it is more, for me, behavioral change. you know, as opposed to, I think we could have all the policies in the world, which are going to be very, very important, but that there's that behavioral and cultural change. And I think there was a question about, you know, why are there more, I guess, from a local government perspective, why there may be more representation on municipal councils. I do want to clarify that. I would say that we need to do a much more in-depth study by community. I think that, you know, the BIPOC community being civically minded, civically engaged, I see opportunity here now. I'm hoping in the next rounds of elections, we're going to see more people from those communities participating. You know, get on a campaign, support those individuals. I think that's one of the things we're going to have to change in terms of how we make decisions and who's making those decisions, and encouraging those communities to be part of, to be more civic minded, to be part of the political and public administration sector. Those are some of my thoughts.
That's great. And Jane, did you want to give us your concluding thoughts?
Yeah, I want to give my concluding thoughts, and I want to address the question that someone asked about whether we are focusing on anti-racism or inclusion. And I want to say that this is a part is made up of the, I mean, makes up the whole. So in the process of focusing on the whole, inclusion is the whole, and focusing on anti-Indigenous racism, anti-Black racism, the rights and discrimination that happened on LGBTQ community, we have to do both. It's not an either or. I think we have to focus on the bone that is hurting. And we know that, and this is my friend Numan who has told me this many times before, that color, race enters the room before anything else enters. So when you get into a room, the first thing that people see, the first thing that enters is your color. And so we cannot separate the pieces from the whole. So it's not an either or, it's an all of them, and identifying how we will prioritize what, when. Right now, we know that the Black, anti-Black racism is what is hurting the most, and we must address that.
Excellent. I do just want to make sure that we're respectful of everybody's time, including our speakers. So we're gonna, unfortunately, we're gonna need to wrap up here, but do want to acknowledge that this has been a fantastic discussion. It's been very inspiring. We very much appreciate the leadership that our panelists have demonstrated, I guess, throughout their career, but also specifically within the last hour or so, inspiring us to do more and you know, at a minimum, learn more about the issues and hear these fantastic perspectives. So again, want to say thank you to all of our panelists and to all of the people who were able to take part in this meeting. We are going to be posting this on the IPAC site, so you're very welcome to share this with your colleagues. And we also at IPAC Toronto, we're looking at what more we can do in this space. So we'd appreciate any further suggestions on that. We're thinking about, you know, potentially additional events, podcasts, possibly some research projects. So we very much see this as an ongoing dialogue and want to continue to maintain the momentum and build on all the great discussion and also some of the progress that has been identified by the speakers. So with that, I'd just like to wish everybody a great rest of the day, and we look forward to continuing this important dialogue with you.
Thank you.
Thank you.